Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We can start today's webinar. Welcome to Partnerships and Alliances presented by Andrea Comastri, which is myself. Matrix on Board, which is the organization that is conducting this webinar, is a group of companies that comprises a number of different companies that work with the not-for-profit sector. In particular, we have Matrix on Board Consulting, which is where I mostly work, which is a management consulting group that supports and strengthens not-for-profits with a whole range of consultancy services. We have Accounting for Good that provides financial intelligence and accounting services for not-for-profit organizations. Matrix on Board Training, that provides training packages and services for community services workers, frontline community services workers, and Board Effect, which is our secure e-governance portal for not-for-profit boards. So a whole suite of services and products that we provide for the benefit of strengthening not-for-profit organization. Today we'll have myself as the main presenter of the webinar, and I will be supported by Grant, who will be providing us with technical support behind the scene and will help us with the answering of questions and fielding of questions from you guys, and any technical support that will need to be provided. And we'll hear in a second from Grant in relation to housekeeping for the day. I myself have had a long experience within the not-for-profit sector. As you can see, for about 20 years I've worked in the not-for-profit sector at executive and director level and continue to, and within Matrix I've worked on a quite large number of capacity building initiatives that have assisted clients in the areas of governance, strategic planning, partnerships, and organizational reviews, and many more areas. And today we'll be talking to you about partnership and alliances. Grant, as I said, will be helping us today from the technical side, and he is actually normally our Board Effect board governance manager and works in that area. Today we will also have a guest, Jess Mawson. Jess has been working as a disability service professional for 15 years in both Australia and the UK, and she is now the manager of Community Access Support Service in Wagga, and she will be providing us a real-world example of an experience of a merger between not-for-profit organizations, and I'm sure you will love what Jess's experience has got to add to us. So I'll hand over now to Grant, who will provide us with some housekeeping advice.
Perfect. Many thanks, Andrea. So welcome to all of you, and just a couple of housekeeping notes, folks, before we get underway today, and that's really if you're new to the GoToWebinar platform, there are a number of different ways that you can interact during today's webinar. If you're listening in today on your computers, speakers, and headphones, and you're having trouble hearing the audio, you do have the option on your GoToWebinar control panel to switch over to the telephone dial-in as an option, and you'll be given some dial-in numbers that you can use on screen. If you've got a question for your presenters today, or you have a technical issue, you can click the raise hand icon to alert us to the fact that you do have a question, and then simply type in your questions or comments in the little questions window that appears at the bottom of your GoToWebinar control panel. So I'll be on hand throughout today's webinar to assist with any technical issues that you've got. So please do feel free to reach out to me and I'll be happy to provide any troubleshooting advice. You might want to give it a quick test run now if you like, and let us know where it is you're joining us from today, where you're joining today's webinar from. So type in where it is you're joining us from today in the little questions window at the bottom of your control panel. While you're doing that, I'll let you know that if any point throughout today's webinar you want to minimize your GoToWebinar control panel to the side of screen, you can do so by selecting the arrow in the orange box. That will just minimize the control panel to the right of screen. Just be sure that when you want to ask some questions or comments or opine, that you click that button and bring it back into view. So it looks like we've got a couple people in the room. Bridget joins us from Melbourne. Margaret's joining from Melbourne as well. Anna from Sydney. John from Gosford. And we've got a few people on the east coast of Australia joining us. So welcome to all of you. And I'll let you know too that during today's webinar, we will be conducting an interactive poll. So I do ask that you please do participate and join in on the fun. And a quick reminder also that we are recording today's webinar. So a copy will be made available to you around about this time tomorrow via email. So you're welcome to share that with any of your colleagues or key staff that have been unable to attend today and might benefit or find value in the content. Alrighty, so let me just, before we get underway, to give you some context behind today's webinar. One of the great things about being consultants for the community sector is that Andrea and I have a lot of opportunities to meet and talk with people from all kinds of organizations in different sectors. And Matrix consultants generally get together and talk about this on a regular basis. And we thought it might be valuable to share some of the conversations and ideas that we've come across with you all today. So today's webinar is the third in a final three-part series that Matrix on Board Consulting is presenting, which really addresses some of the key methodologies and approaches that we're hearing nonprofits talk about in the community sector space. It's also an opportunity for us today to share with you guys some of the people that we've met during our projects and research. These are people with lived experience and they've got some great stories to tell, and Jess is a perfect example of that. At a big picture level, the challenges for nonprofits, continue. So we know that, there's tight and competitive funding for a shrinking pool of money. There are for-profit organizations entering into some sectors, significant policy changes, increased demand for services, higher rate and pace of change, challenges recruiting and keeping good staff and volunteers. It goes on and on. It's all happening. And while none of this is new, there's a feeling out there sometimes of this kind of feeling of hopelessness, frustration, and a bit of exhaustion. But in contrast, there are also some feelings out there of determination, excitement, and a renewed sense of identity. There are opportunities living inside the challenges, and more the sector is looking at thinking collectively, working and playing well with others, and not working alone. So there is this acknowledgement that a single organization alone cannot address the change that is required. And so we see collaboration appearing pretty much everywhere. So as a result, we've put together this three-part webinar series comprised of, first webinar was on collective impact, our second webinar on collaborative creation, and today's final webinar, partnerships and alliances, which Andrea will deliver to you in a moment. So to kick us off, what I thought we might do before I hand you over to Andrea is we might kick off today's webinar theme of partnerships and alliances with a quick poll that asks the simple question: if your organization is considering partnering or merging with another organization, what's your main reason for it? What's your motivation behind that? So let me share with you now on screen a poll, which you will see a big box appear on your screen, and you will all have the opportunity to select the most valid response. So what's your main motivation? Is it to share resources? Is it to improve operational efficiency? Is it to increase knowledge base to reduce costs by cutting overheads? Or is it another reason, or you're not considering partnering or merging at present? So I can see that about half the room has taken the opportunity to cast their response. I might leave the poll open just a tiny bit longer. If you haven't cast your response, please do. And then we can share the results with you on screen, and Andrea will discuss those a little further. So it looks like everyone in the room has cast their response. So I'm going to close off the poll and share with you now the results on screen. So we can see that 40% of you in the room, it's an other reason, or you're not considering partnership or merging at the moment, but there is also a slight number that are wanting to share resources, improve operational efficiency, and reduce costs by cutting overheads. So some interesting results. So to dig a little bit deeper and now look at some of the trends that we're seeing in the wider community sector, I'll turn you over to Andrea, and he will get us underway with today's webinar. So Andrea, over to you.
Thank you very much, Grant. Thanks for all that support. I'm sure that will be very useful for all our participants. And thanks everyone for participating in the poll, because it just gives us a little bit of an idea of where you're coming from and where your thinking is at the moment in relation to partnering and alliances. And that's where I wanted to start with. I wanted to start with sharing with you some information that was collected in two sort of different type of examples. The first one is the result of the Westpac Community Confidence Index report in 2013.
Andre, I'll just to interrupt you there. Sorry, you can share your screen with the audience now if you go back windows.
That's what I thought I was doing. Share my screen. Okay.
There we go.
Okay. Perfect. So you should be able to see my screen now.
Looks good.
Perfect. Thanks, Grant. So the data is a couple of years old, but it's still quite relevant, and then we will have something from 2015. So according to this report, 1 in 4 of the organizations that were surveyed of 789 sample, they were likely to partner or merge for growth. 1 in 4 were likely to partner or merge to secure long-term future. 1 in 10 merged or partner in the previous 6 months, and 1 in 3 could see partnering or merging as essential for survival. And obviously all these things are interconnected as answers. And the top 2 reasons, going back to the reasons that you picked as well, were that of sharing resources or improving operational efficiency. And obviously, as I said, these answers are interconnected. And once you see sort of the spread of the type of answers, you'll see that yes, the majority of the intention or possible partnering or collaboration or merging was driven by the need to share resources or the desire to share resources, improve efficiency, reduce costs, cutting overheads, and so on, and survive for some. Closer to today, in 2015, just recently, the Australian Institute of Company Directors published a discussion paper covering critical issues for not-for-profit directors. This was a bit of a larger sample, and I thought I'd draw out a couple of statements which sort of go very well with what we were saying before and what we'll be saying throughout the presentation today. So, it appears that there is an increased interest in taking partnership and collaborations to a new level, and that's the difference. We're going to a new level. 3 out of 10 not-for-profit directors said that their boards have discussed mergers in the last 12 months. However, and that's very important, only a small proportion of those discussions about mergers and collaborations were expected to result in a merger. And many previous mergers have failed to meet expectation because primarily there were differences in culture, and that's fundamental. And you'll see that throughout this afternoon that the differences in cultures and values are fundamental to a success story. And a history of collaboration amongst the partners, 2 or more partners, it's generally a good marker of successful merger rather than a meeting of 2 or more organizations that have never done anything together before successfully or at all. Now, what are the contexts? What is the context and what are the drivers for this pressure that we hear, that we feel? The fact itself, I suppose, that you're present here today tells me that even though you may not be considering partnering or merging with anyone, it's something that it's in the air and people talk about it. So government policies, significant changes over the last couple of years and in the years to come, just think of the NDIS, just think of consumer directed care in aged care, think of the going home, staying home reform in the homelessness sector, and so on. The government policies are definitely driving, probably the main driver. They are the main driver of these changes. The importance of economies of scales, and again, this list is quite interconnected and overlapping, but the market is becoming more important, even from an ideological and philosophical point of view. The importance of the market and market-driven services. The trend from funding body point of view to favor larger organizations. However, in this, I put a little note in there, don't assume too much about this because you may be misled by this concept. I have had personal experience myself when working with a regional organization in this area, where there was an assumption that the government would have wanted them to partner or merge, collaborate with a larger organization, but the funding body somehow had different ideas in terms of somehow, I suppose you could say, manipulating the market in a way that there was some competitive makeup of the market in there. So they don't, not necessarily the larger organizations are the favored by the funding body. What the funding bodies most likely prefer is to have to deal with one contractor, one organization, but then with a number of potential collaborators and contractors under that. That is possibly a quite clear reality. But there's increasing contract and compliance costs for organizations that put pressure on them to want to collaborate and share resources. The acceptance of the user contribution to the services is becoming another philosophical principle that is becoming quite accepted within the sector. The changing needs and expectation of clients, baby boomers and beyond now have different expectations compared to the previous generations, and so we need to prepare ourselves to provide a service that has this flexible, it's customized, that sort of meets choices requirements not only by the funding bodies but by the market itself. And so all of this and the general concept of globalization and increased competition, whereby we see operators even from overseas coming into Australia over the last few years, and there will be more to operate in the not-for-profit sector and take, if you want to put it in a sort of business context, market share away and put pressure on existing organizations. So there's a whole sort of big picture that is driving this increased pressure to partner amongst organizations. And I must say that if you, like me, have worked within the not-for-profit sector for quite a long time, you would say that the sector has always collaborated quite effectively, and there's always been partnerships and collaborations, and that's actually been pretty much the DNA of a not-for-profit organization. And we've shared and we've opened up and we've collaborated all the time. But the terminology, the term partnership, has been a little bit loose in the way we've used it, and so we've always sort of shown, shown to the funding bodies and to the community that we have had partnership with other organizations, but they may not have been formalized and documented and sort of with a contract or with an agreement and so on. Now the new world, if you want to call it that way, forces in a way collaboration and competition upon us in a bit more structured way, and we therefore need to define and tighten up the loose term partnership rather than the concept of collaboration only. And so what options do we have? We have a continuum of options, I suppose. They go from an informal to a more formal setup, to a low integration to a high integration setup. And we see this as on a continuum in a way. An organization move up and down, and generally from the less to the more integrated over time, but not necessarily there could be a going back and forth along this continuum. And so we can have examples of organizations that network, or one is a supplier of another, and that's already some sort of formal collaboration. But they can then, as I move towards a more integrated level of collaboration, we can talk about resource sharing and outsourcing of specific services, all the way then to forming an alliance or a coalition. And you can see now where you start to hear also terminology that has been used recently, also on the back of quite a few new competitive tenders that various government agencies have put out. Consortia, joint ventures, all the way to much more integrated level of collaboration that can become that is represented by mergers or acquisitions from one organization to another. And so across this continuum from less to more integrated, there's a whole variety. Obviously, it's not black and white. There's a whole variety of grey areas, but that's how I suppose we we like to sort of create the picture of this variety of possible options of collaborations amongst organizations. So we want to partner. We need to partner. Probably sometimes we feel that sort of there's a pressure around us to want to do that. But the question is, there are a number of questions that we need to answer, and one of which is more fundamental, more important than others. We definitely need to know who we want to partner with. We need to identify our partner, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. We need to understand what we want to partner about, what is this partnership about, how are we going to do it, how are we going to set it up, how are we going to structure it, how is it going to function, when is it going to happen, how long is it going to take. But most importantly, I like to say that we need to answer the why question. Why do we want to partner? Why do we need to partner? What is the reason behind this need that it's either sort of felt by us from external forces, I suppose, or that we feel internally? Is it because we want to create a greater impact, have a greater impact on the community we serve, on the wider community? Do we want to have a greater reach, both geographical and in terms of demographic reach? Is it because of a financial imperative? Is it because of compliance pressures? And I really feel that understanding the why question is essential. And I believe that knowing the answer will not necessarily guarantee the success of a partnership, but not knowing that answer, not answering that question, will almost guarantee the failure. And I think that's an important element. So you need to know why you're doing it, and you need to ask those questions, because it could also be that you feel the pressure to do that, but you don't really need to do that. So you need to be convinced of why you're going down that path. In relation to this, I just wanted to share the link that you will see also, and then in the recording when you receive it, it's a video about understanding the why, starting with the why. Simon Sinek, some of you may know him. It's a public video available online. He talks about it, not about partnership. He talks about marketing, but I always think that it's a good little video that it's only about 5 minutes that you can see that I will suggest you watch. So we need to think strategically. Are we going to better deliver on our strategy if we collaborate? What is that? Why we're doing it? Are we going to benefit our clients better? But also, do we have enough time? Do we have enough money? Do we have the capacity to collaborate? And otherwise, if we don't answer these questions, it will fail later on, and we will talk about this a little bit later. What would our stakeholders say? What type of collaboration will suit us? And I think this is where I would like to introduce Jess and ask her to talk to you about her experience briefly of her organization and what they did in the area of merger and acquisition.
All right, welcome, Jess.
Thanks, Andrea.
You're on the line, so I'll just
give
you presenter rights so we can see your screen. So if you just
can you see my screen now?
Just hit the OK or share button. There we go. Looks good. You're all set to go.
You've got me? Okay, great. Well, thanks for your time, and I'll just get through this. So our history of CAS was that our service began more than 20 years ago to ensure people with complex disabilities had an appropriate and responsive day service in Wagga Wagga. Our service grew over the years, but it remained very small and family-like. While there had been many changes, our core business remained the same. Oh, I have got the wrong one up. I'm so sorry. Give me 2 seconds. I've got the wrong screen up. Okay, sorry. Our history. Since the inception of CAS, in order to operate the businesses...
Just throw it into slideshow mode there, Jess, when you're free.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're right.
Sorry.
All set.
Okay. And I need to go back. Okay. This is my first time as a presenter on a webinar. Sorry, guys. While there had been many changes, our core business remained the same. And that was to ensure our clients remained at the centre of our service, and the programs we delivered reflected the goals and the needs of clients and their families so that they had the best life possible. Since the inception of CAS, in order to operate our business, we were solely reliant on government funding from the New South Wales Government, ADAC. The money had been received 3 months in advance and had allowed CAS to have positive cash flow in the bank at all times. The National Disability Insurance Scheme is the long overdue and necessary reform of Australia's disability support system. While the benefits to clients and families in this new world are exceptional, the new environment for disability raised significant challenges and risks for current service providers like CAS. The board of CAS spent many months reviewing the viability of the service. This included working through a roadmap provided by NDS that looked at all areas of service, a SWOT analysis, and a financial risk assessment. That took quite a lot of time. I need to be honest and say that that was probably nearly a 12-month process of actually assessing where our service was and how we might fit in the future. The board felt that our biggest concerns were our lack of infrastructure, our reliance on funding in advance to ensure positive cash flow, and our limited capacity to increase our marketing given our small market share already. After careful and lengthy consideration, the board came to the conclusion that as a small organisation, CAS would not be in a strong position to survive in this new world. We felt that the best way to ensure our clients continued to thrive from the services we provided, along with the invaluable relationships already forged with carers and other clients, was to consider becoming a part of another larger organisation. The board spent considerable time assessing opportunities for CAS to move forward and decided to enter into a MOU with Northcott. I think I need to be honest now and say that the reason we ended up going with the service of Northcott is because in our local area we already had quite a strong relationship with them. We'd already worked together previously, and having looked at their service and seeing how deeply embedded their person-centred practices were, it felt like a similar fit. And it felt like the best fit for our service. We hoped that by Northcott embracing CAS, we could continue to offer our clients a progressive and exciting day service for years to come. What happened next? So Northcott and CAS undertook formal due diligence process, which involved each organisation looking at each other's finances, legal structures, assets, governance, tax records, culture and more. The process did take some time as there was a lot of information to look over and analyse. As new developments arose, we informed the CAS membership and stakeholders by a number of different formats, including newsletters, informal chats and meetings. We had a local disability advocacy for service come and meet with our clients and families to give them an opportunity to get some advice and understanding about the process and what their voting rights would be as members. For CAS, the members had the final vote in the acquisition. So before we could make any decisions and before there was anything to do with Northcott, our membership had to feel confident that this was the right decision for themselves and for our membership. The CAS membership did vote unanimously to have this acquisition approved. The Northcott board also voted in favour of the acquisition. For both CAS and Northcott, the #1 priority was to make sure that people with a disability, their families and carers, continued to receive the same high quality supports that they'd been receiving up until now. After the vote had taken place, a transition plan was established and that incorporated all areas of service delivery. Sorry, I need a drink. We are currently on track for a 1st of July 2015 formal transfer. A transition advisory committee has been created and will continue to advise and provide support through the transition once the CAS board ceases to exist. Thus far, there's been a lot of positivity and excitement, but naturally there's some nervousness from clients and staff, but we're working hand in hand to ensure a smooth and calm transition. Some of the lessons that we've learned along the way would include that this is a really long process. For us, it began back in 2013 for the CAS board, and it took us some serious commitment from the board as well as the management team. And I think that's all in talking as to what Andrea had said earlier about working out why you wanted to make this decision and what the benefits were going to be for our client base. And being prepared to acknowledge the true nature of the relationship that is to occur. So there's no point in calling something a merger when actually it's an acquisition. We were lucky that we were able to come to this, we came to this conclusion quite early in our processes. We could see that given our size, what we were looking to do we didn't want to create another service with a different service. We actually just wanted to value add to an existing service. So that can kind of be a scary discussion. Initially for our board, it was like, are we merging? Is it a partnership? But when we really looked at what the relationship we were looking at, it was more of an acquisition. For us, it was an essential as a small service to receive some outside support and advice. We engaged legal, financial and strategic advice advice before, during and after the due diligence process. We also engaged Matrix on board to support us with our due diligence process. This support was invaluable as it provided an unbiased opinion on the information we needed and what had been provided. And the biggest one for us is just embracing it. The process is actually quite scary and it can be overwhelming, especially for the smaller of the two services. There's a feeling that, you know, we're not going to exist anymore. How do we keep our identity? How do we keep our identity? How do we continue to ensure these that our service remains strong and the services that we provide remain strong, even if, you know, CAS itself doesn't exist? How can we ensure that we're still giving our clients the service that they need? And we felt that by working really hard together with Northcott, that will continue for years to come. But it's about both organisations understanding each other. So we were lucky as a smaller organisation that Northcott was really supportive and said, you know, we're able to look at things and say, okay, well, you maybe don't have the same sort of infrastructure that we do, but, you know, looking at different ways to provide information necessary during the transitions. And that's about me. Thanks, Andrea.
Thank you very much, Cass. I think that was fantastic, and I think I need to show my screen. That's right. Oops. Just bear with me, guys, for a second. Grant, am I okay? Am I on? Yep. Am I sharing my screen?
Not yet. So if you just click
not yet.
Share.
Yep. Show my screen.
There
Perfect.
We go. So just go into slideshow.
Okay,
yep,
here we go.
Set.
Thank you very much, Jess. That was brilliant, and I'm hoping that our participants today appreciate the value of it, because I think there's nothing more valuable than a real world example and sort of hear what really from the horse's mouth how it happened. And obviously in Jess's example, their case was on the one far end of the spectrum of that continuum of collaboration and integration, and we're talking about an acquisition. But in many of the things that she said apply very well to whatever other level of integration and collaboration you think of along that continuum. And a lot of the things that Jess said, you will recognize now in the little model that I will show you in the next few minutes. So we've answered the question why. That is, as Jess said, as I said, it's a fundamental question, and unless we've answered that question, we will very likely fail later on down the path. So we need to know exactly where we're coming from and why we're doing it. And that answer to the question why may actually even be revisited, I suppose, later on during the path. But I suppose it's fundamental that we answer that question. Then I'm going to show you now a bit of a model to sort of, which looks very linear, but in reality, the journey of partnership and collaboration is definitely not a linear journey. I'm sure Jess would concur with this, and as she said, a very, very long time generally. But just to give a little bit of structure, we want to understand whether we have the capacity to partner first. So we need to make sure that in-house we're in order. We are in the perfect situation, the right situation to be able to partner. And often the organizations decide to go down a path, a journey of collaboration, when they have internally some difficulties. And the important thing is to actually do that in advance, and so be strategic and see ahead of time and try and see what's coming, understand the environment around you, and make sure that we have our things in order internally. So you need to have the right resources, you need to have the right tools, so information management, you need to have the right systems in place, you need to have an organization that functions reasonably well and knows what it's doing, I suppose, but that has other drivers for potential collaboration. You need to have money. I mean, Jess hinted to the fact that, you know, they engaged legal advice, financial advice, a little bit of our help, and so on. You need to have a little bit of resources that you associate and you allocate to this particular project, which is a project in itself, that of sort of the journey of partnership. So it will cost you money. There's no doubt that the journey will. You need to have time. As just said, it took them about a couple of years, and that's quite reasonable, and I think possibly quite common to other experiences as well that I've witnessed. It takes time because there's time to mature the conviction, but also to then also make things happen, and it can get a little bit tricky along the way. You need to have the right skills on board, so hopefully you've got them already, both on the board and on staff, but you may need to bring them in terms of external consultants or in terms of temporary employment or employ particular roles along the way that may help you or have experience in the area of collaboration, partnering, and so on. And you need to have leadership. You'll see that the concept of leadership appears pretty much across all the various steps. But unless you have your leadership of your organization is on board with this, and when I say leadership, I mean both at CEO level or general management level, depending on your structure, and the board. And there needs to be a marrying of convictions and an alignment of convictions at that level in order for it to work. Otherwise, it's going to be very hard to make it work. Once we've understood the why and we've assessed an internal capacity to partner, so we have what we need to start this journey, this long journey and complex journey, we want to start approaching others, or maybe we've been approached, or maybe think that has happened before. As I said, it's not such a linear it's just as linear as it looks on the screen. But when we talk about approaching others and understanding other organizations, we want to make sure that there is value alignment. As you remember, one of the first slides, we were talking about culture, differences in culture. You need to have similar culture or definitely similar values that drive what you're doing. And no doubt between Northcote and CAS, for example, there would have been some differences because of difference in sizes, a different of the history and so on. But I'm sure there was some alignment in the values that were driving their activities and their services and their strategy going forward. There need to be hopefully some existing relationships. Again, in one of the slides that I was talking about before from the Institute of Company Directors, they were talking about existing successful collaborations as a marker for potential more successful stories in a partnership journey. And if you have an existing relationship, that will definitely help, rather than going on a shopping spree, I suppose, of finding the right partner out there that when you haven't really spoken to them before or worked with them before and you don't know them. But that doesn't mean that it can't work, but you need to take your time to get to know each other. It's like in a couple relationship. Strategy, you need to understand your strategy, and you need to be clear about your strategy, and you need to understand the other organizations or partners, could be more than one partner, their strategy and where they're going and why they want to work together. You need to understand who your stakeholders are first, and you need to maybe talk to some of your stakeholders, and you may need to communicate in different ways to different stakeholders along the journey. Jess talked about their members. We need to talk about the funding bodies. I made a reference before to having assisted an organization in liaising with their funding body and understanding their drivers in terms of them working with an organization rather than another. And so stakeholders are very important, but it's also important that you understand to what extent you can communicate and you should communicate along the way, because obviously there will be some level of information that may be commercial in confidence or commercially critical that may jeopardize the actual journey as you go through it. But there's no doubt that where you can be transparent and when you can be transparent, you should do that immediately and try and get information and feelings from the stakeholders about your intentions and consult. And again, leadership is important, as I said, across the whole journey. And it's at this point that you can start thinking about what type of partnership, what type of actually legal and organizational setup, governance setup you can have between the partners. You don't need to define it now, but you need to start thinking, do we want to merge? And just as she said, they probably started quite early in answering that question in terms of being pretty much an acquisition. But do we want to collaborate? Do we want to keep the two identities separate? So this is where the phase where you start thinking about that. Then it comes the point where you want to assess the opportunity itself. So not just the possible collaborator and partner, but the actual opportunity in front of you. And this is where you may start needing some external support because it becomes a little bit more technical and more detailed. And so you want to conduct the typical SWOT analysis, but the SWOT analysis is about the actual opportunity and the actual collaboration. So what are the strengths and the weaknesses of this potential collaboration, and what are the opportunities and the threats of this collaboration? And once you've identified those, and you do that in as much a consultative way as possible internally, you will be able to identify then the weaknesses and those threats that you can use in a risk assessment, and try and define what are the mitigating factors. How can you address those weaknesses? How can you address those threats? Can you bring in another partner? Can you partner for certain things rather than everything, and so on? So it's obviously very complex and very hard to sort of give the generic picture at this point, but those weaknesses and threats will help you assess the risks and address and manage those risks. At the same time, the strengths and the opportunities of the analysis will help you in defining and working out a cost-benefit analysis of the actual partnership, and so understand what the costs are and what are the benefits. And costs can be just not financial costs, cost also from a point of view of reputation, for example, and relationships and so on, and services that you may need to drop or modify, and benefits, not just financial benefits, but also benefit from a wider perspective. And in this, you want to conduct a due diligence exercise. Specifically with Jess, that's what we supported CAS with. But due diligence means understanding what are the actual, what do we know exactly about the other organization, and at this point is where the two parties or parties involved need to start being a little bit, quite a bit more open with each other, and being prepared to share information like accounts or like contractual obligations, like potential litigation that there may be in the pipeline for some organizations, or risks and so on, because only at that point you'll be able to, by being that open, you'll be able to assess your risks and understand whether you are being diligent in your decision as a director or as a manager or as a member of an organization. So the due diligence exercise is very important in understanding what you're getting into, I suppose, and understanding the other side. And as I said, there needs to be a certain level of openness and transparency and honesty between the parties at this point. And again, this is where you probably now be able to define even more in detail what type of partnership you'll be able to set up amongst the parties, and therefore what type of legal tools and legal mechanisms you will have in place, or you'll start defining in writing. Following this, we are going into the implementation phase, and the implementation phase is where the details come up, and the devil is always in detail. And often, and I've experienced it myself when supporting organizations, for example, in the Going Home, Staying Home reform, where in the homelessness sector, where organizations got together and everything looked really good, and the intentions were there, and the objectives were there were value alignments, there was SWOT analysis, risk assessment, but then came the implementation after the funding was approved, and some of these partnership and consortia and joint working arrangements broke down. Not all of them, definitely not all of them, many are sort of flourishing and working quite well, but some broke down, or some pieces of these joint working arrangements fell off, because once we start implementing the plan, the reality hits, and there may be details that we haven't covered, and there may be problems in actually making it work. So we want to make sure that we document what we're doing well. So at this point, there would have been most likely a memorandum of understanding or heads of agreement, but at this point we're actually going down to a more legal contractual sort of arrangement, depending on, again, how integrated the collaboration we're talking about. In the specific case of CAS, obviously it will be a more formalized, documented contractual arrangement between the parties, where lawyers would need to be involved, or the legal departments of organizations if you have one. Planning, you need to consider this, an implementation of a partnership or a merger or collaboration, as a project. And so you need to have a project plan with resources allocated, money allocated, timeframes allocated, deadlines, and checking in, and it needs to be managed like as a project in itself, because in the meantime you're actually running an organization and your services. You don't put the organization on hold, so things need to continue, and that's why it will cost you money and it will cost you resources and time, because you can't continue doing the same things without having additional support, whether they be in-house additional support or outsourced additional support. But it needs to be planned and it needs to be checked in, and there needs to be obviously a sharing of this plan between the parties involved in the collaboration, and some governance of this new collaboration as it's implemented, not even at the end yet, but just as it's implemented. Obviously, leadership continues to be an essential part, because again, once we start implementing the plan, we need to be very aware that there are consequences for those involved. There may be consequences of people having to change their jobs within the organization. Some may lose their jobs, or some may need to relocate, or depending on what the detail of the collaboration. But there will be changes, and there will be anxiety amongst the various people within the organization, whether it be a director level or whether it be a staff level. And there's a lot of emotions involved, and history and attachment to the history of an organization, and I'm sure that was the case also in the case of CAS. And so you need to have leadership, and you need to have the right resourcing in place. And if we're talking about an very integrated level of partnership and collaboration to the extent of a merger or an acquisition, integrating the cultures and therefore exercises around the cultures of the organizations before, during, and after are very, very important, and very important to make sure that the two realities merge together in a way that their cultures work together well, and it will take some time. Definitely, will take some time even after the partnership is implemented. You also want to make sure that you measure as much as it's possible to measure, and as hard as it is to measure outcomes of what we do in our sector. But we want to try and identify KPIs and objectives and goals in the first place, so that we can assess whether we've actually achieved those goals, whether it be in the project itself or in the results, or the reason why we are partnering, and the services that we are creating or augmenting, improving. And we want to celebrate. We want to celebrate throughout the process, not just at the end, definitely at the end, but what is the end anyway? Because it's an ongoing change, but you want to measure, you want to celebrate throughout the process, and make sure that you acknowledge the anxieties and the difficulties and the successes as you go through. And again, show leadership in doing this. As I said at the beginning, all this looks very linear on the screen, but it's not. And so you'll have things going back and forth. You'll have, you may sort of get to a point, but then you actually go back again, and then come back again, and then go forward and go back. So it's complex. It's complicated. It involves human beings. It involves a lot of other things, and so it becomes very complicated. And the other thing that you want to do is also have some exiting provisions. Obviously, it will get to a point, for example, in the example of CAS and Northcott, it gets to a point where there's a point of no return, I suppose, because the organization will have merged. But throughout the process, you need to have some exited provisions and mechanisms allowed, either because the collaboration is temporary and therefore you will have a clarity of when the collaboration finishes, or because things go pear-shaped, because it does happen. Things can go pear-shaped, or because things change, and therefore you want to have some exiting mechanisms in place. Also because if you can, you want to exit in a nice way, and part way, not as a breakdown of the relationship, but as a change of the relationship rather than a breaking it down. And so it's important to think ahead, always think a few steps ahead. But again, if it's an integrated arrangement, if it's a merger, it's an acquisition, once that has happened, it's going to be very hard to unscramble the egg, I suppose, the eggs, I suppose. So you need to have that to acknowledge that. And I also wanted to share with you, before we finish and pass on to some questions that hopefully you may have a thought throughout the process, the last two slides. One is a list of common mistakes in mergers and acquisitions. It's a list that has been put together by Paul Siegenthaler, author of The Perfect Mergers and Acquisitions, The Art of Business Integration, published and available online. And it's just a list that that is important. When I came across us, I thought this will be very important to share, because it matches pretty much, even though it comes from a corporate background mentality, even if it comes from a merger and acquisitions focus, it actually matches very well what we've been saying and what I'll say as takeaways at the end. The common mistakes in mergers and acquisitions that often cause failures are ignorance of each other's and of the situations and of the context, not having a common vision between organization and values, surprises that come from poor due diligence. You haven't really done your homework properly about the other party, not having sufficient resources put on the team and on the project, poor governance. So throughout, it's not clear what decisions are made, and also at the end, it's not clear how the new entity is governed. Poor communication between the parties. Communication is definitely key. Poor program management. So again, managing the project poorly and not clearly, not having set targets and milestones throughout, but also having lack of courage in which leadership. You will need to make tough decisions, make tough decisions throughout the process, and decisions that will need to be with strong conviction, courage, and while consulting and being as open as you can. There are some decisions that you need to make that may have consequences for others, may not that's the ideal decision, and so strong leadership, strong courage in the journey is essential. And finally, don't always the parts organization position. It doesn't mean that totally.
I think we may have an issue with the audio there, Andrea. I think if you just want to stop with your mic for a second, it's becoming a bit broken up. So
sure.
Wait for your audio to reconnect. You might just want to give your microphone a little bit of a jiggle.
Can you hear me better?
No, it seems to have gotten a bit worse, so you might want to take a break momentarily, or even dial in on a landline. I'd say so, yeah. So, no, it's coming up very broken, so we might just wait a second for Andrea's audio to come back. Apologies for any audio issues you've experienced there, folks. That only just came through on my end, so thank you to a few of you that noted that. And we'll just wait for Andrea's audio to come back online.
Okay, so can you hear me any better now?
We're crystal clear again, Andrea, so you're
okay, perfect. There we go. So you don't necessarily want to lose what you've acquired and the culture of what you've acquired in the new organization. So that's another sort of, I suppose, important element that Paul sort of brings up in his list. Finally, I just wanted to conclude before we move on to questions with what I consider being success factors. And this is, to a certain extent, a repetition of the things that I brought up, but sort of a takeaways. There needs to be value alignment between your organizations or the various partners. You need to know your organization well, know yourself well, and also know your potential partner or partners well before you take the final step. There needs to be strategic alignment or complementarity between the strategies. You don't want to put together two organizations that have got completely different objectives and completely different strategies and start a new journey. So it's very important to be clear about what the strategies are, to have a strategy in the first place, and to be clear and open and discuss it with the other partners. You need leadership. You need to put vision and mission first, and so don't consider egos. We need to be able to let go, and there's no doubt that in the CAS situation, for example, the board members and the staff, but the board members, for example, that have been members of the organization for quite a long time, and the local community there needed to consider, and they did, the outcomes rather than the position on the board or the ongoing role within a board and individual personality. So leadership in that, being able to let go is a great sign of leadership. Having clear goals. Unless you've got clear goals, you don't know where you're going. Even though they may be adjusted along the way, but be clear about what your goals are and be able to measure them at a later stage and throughout the journey. Have great relationship management skills. They're fundamental. Communication, both internally and externally, is key. You need to understand when it's time to communicate and what and how, both internally and externally. You need to be able to maintain the relationships with the partners or the potential partners, but also with the various the key stakeholders along the way, and that is fundamental. After all, we're talking about a relationship. That's what we're talking about. Time. Jess said it. Took a couple of years. That's how long it takes to sort of integrate, organize it, to sort of actually not even integrate them, to get to the point where you can get to the go, in a way, to the starting point of the new organization. It takes time to design it. It takes time to answer the questions that you need to answer, the why questions, how to do it. Who, with, what are we actually doing? It takes time, so don't rush it. Don't go into it, rush it. Don't put yourself in the situation where you're doing this because there's a new funding requirement coming up. So you want to think ahead of time. Think ahead of time, and don't be driven by external factors that you can't drive, and don't be time poor. Obtain expert advice, whether it be financial, legal, or anything else strategic. Have expert advice and people that have got this expertise in the various areas. And finally, have the right resources. Identify a team internally. Identify champions that can take along people on the journey, get people on the bus with you. Possibly identify a board subcommittee, because, as I said, the board will need to continue to govern the organization in its normal business, and this is a new element, and so you might want to identify a subcommittee made up of board or other individuals internally that drives this internally. And money. You need to have a little bit of money aside, because there will be some costs, and you can't expect the same people to continue to run the organization as it is, plus doing this additional major project, which is probably the biggest project that you've ever embarked in. And so these are what I would consider the key success factors for a successful journey into a partnership and collaboration journey. And this brings me to the questions, and so I'll pass on the mic back on to Grant.
Yeah, so thanks, Andrea. We've got a couple questions that came throughout today's webinar. One of them is a fairly general one. Jane asked, what would you be looking at when conducting the due diligence exercise?
Yeah, so obviously it depends, and I know that everyone probably always hates this type of answer, but it will depend on the context, but definitely there will be some key areas that you will be looking at in terms of, and this is what, for example, we helped Cass with, what are the financial fundamentals of the organization that we're looking at partnering with. So profit and loss, key ratios, what is their assets, what's their balance sheet like, what are their liabilities, so financial things, what are their funding sources, where are they coming from, are they secure, how long are they for, what are the internal systems, so that's another area that you want to be looking at, but also you want to ask the other party to declare whether they have, for example, pending litigations, and obviously the other party needs to be open about it, but you may ask for a declaration from them, signed by them, for what it's worth, that says we don't have any pending litigations in place, or we don't have any risks, or this is our risk assessment, this is our risk management plan. So you might want to actually obtain that from the other party. And obviously look at annual reports, look at their strategic plan, look at their board profile, and so ask for job descriptions, or ask for CVs of the board members, and understand. You want to understand the other organization. So financial, legal, risk, human resources and industrial relations, whether what are the contractual nature of the relationship between the organization and their employees, and a whole series possibly of other areas. But this is, if I think back of how we have assisted Cass, these are probably the areas that we assisted them with.
Perfect. And that's probably a good lead on to the next question, which is more so one for you, Jess, to consider. Anything to add there? One of the questions that came through from Anna is, how did Cass measure cultural due diligence, I should say?
Okay, so we did a lot of, on a local level, we went and looked at, with the board, myself, so the part of our management team, we went and actually had a look at some of their services here on a local level in Wagga. We met with coordinators, we talked to their person-centred champions, so really got to get some information from the clients that were receiving services from Northcott. We also went up to one of their bigger offices, which was up in Sydney, and we again met with more clients. We met with the CEO, the CFO. We met with a lot of different people and really measured that. And on their end, they actually met with all of our staff during the due diligence and all that process to say, hey, where are you guys at? Do you fit with our philosophies and our thinkings before we kind of move forward with any of that sort of thing?
Okay.
So it was really, that took some time. That was really, especially that was really quite hard in assessing how well they fit. We had an idea that the services, because they were both, strong disability services, that there would be similarities, but it was really important just to ensure that had happened.
That's a fantastic example. Yeah.
And there's one very quick question we might want to address, Jess, before we wrap it up, because we're at the top of the hour here. Yep. What was the hardest aspect for you of making the decision to become part of another organisation, and do you have any regrets?
Okay, so the hardest part was actually going, this is where we're at. It was actually acknowledging that as a service, and I think, the board worked for a long time, and there was probably a key moment when the chairman looked at everybody else and said, I just don't think we're going to survive. And that's a really hard conversation. It's the hardest point to get to, and it was really tough because this service had existed for 20 years, but knowing how small a market share we had and what a niche service we really were. I mean, we had 25 clients and 10 staff, knowing that in an NDIS world we were just not going to survive. So that was probably one of the hardest parts. In terms of regrets, look, no, I don't think we have any regrets. I think just probably being a little bit, for me, because I was probably one of the main drivers in terms of I'm the service manager, and so it was a huge workload on me. So I regret probably not being better prepared for how much work this was going to be. I think just acknowledging that it is going to be a massive amount of work, that I think at the time the board and I thought, okay, we'll make this decision. They've made the decision, and okay, let's just start going through the processes. But that's when the hard work really started. It felt like all the hard work was getting to that point, and then it got just that little bit harder. And the point that I'm at now is I feel really good about it, and I think the board feels really good because we can see how many more increased opportunities our clients are going to receive, and we can see them having more choice and capacity in this new model with Northcott. So,
and that's great, Jess, because everything you're saying make me picture you in the various little boxes that I had on the screen before, where you've answered that the big thing was answering why, and coming to the realization of why you wanted to do it, and then the money, the time, the complexity of the whole thing, and then the implementation, the devil in the detail, and how much resources you need. And so that if there are some takeaways that our audience today can take away with them, I think these are the ones.
Yeah, and commit to all working together with the other service. Don't think not being scared about being with a bigger service. I think that was initially quite daunting for me because the service Northcott is so much bigger than us, and not being too daunted by that, going, that's okay, but just working through it. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jess. We've gone a couple of minutes over time, so I hope our audience is stuck around with us. And Grant, do you want to just say something about the follow-up?
Yeah, just wanted to remind everyone that, first of all, thank you for attending today. A copy of this webinar recording will go out to you via email around about this time tomorrow. And any of your colleagues and key staff that didn't have an opportunity to attend today, you're welcome to share the recording with them. So many thanks for attending today. Thanks, Andrea. Thanks, Jess. And signing off for now from me.
Thank you, and good luck to everyone.
Thank you.